This episode includes brief discussion of sexual abuse and suicidal ideation. Listener discretion is advised.
And it's really hard when your child is telling you who they are and you have no familiarity with it. You have no examples of what that looks like. And your entire culture around you is telling you that's not real.
Abby Maxwell's little daughter wanted the pink shoes. She wanted to dress as a witch on Halloween in kindergarten. In first grade, she wore her hair long and envied the dance costumes other girls got to wear for the recital. The problem was that Abby's daughter was known to her and to their rural, conservative New Hampshire town as a boy. Suddenly, the little town Abby loved with all her heart became engulfed in a hurricane of controversy with her daughter right in the eye of the storm. In this episode, Abby tells the story of how her doubts about trans people turned into understanding about her own daughter, and then fear for her family's safety. We're talking about her new memoir, One Day I'll Grow Up and Be a Beautiful Woman, a mother's story. If you've got questions about transgender kids like I did, this is a good place to start. I'm journalist Blair Hodges, and this is Relationscapes. Abby Maxwell, welcome to Relationscapes.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
So you've written this book as a mother about you and your child and your family, and I wondered how your child now feels about the book, if they've read it or what kind of input they had. Just kind of exploring the idea of privacy versus the need for stories to be told. It's especially tricky with kids, right? Because trans kids, we need these stories to be out there so people can understand their experiences, but they also deserve private lives as well. So maybe speak to that factor.
Yeah, sure. My daughter is very excited about the book coming out, and she is furious that I changed her name for the book. So my name, of course, is the same, but everyone else's name changed in the book. When I was a few drafts into the book and knew that I was going to publish it, I sat down with her and went over every section that she is in. So not including sections where school boards were talking about her, that sort of thing.
Right.
But the times when she and I were having conversations, all of that, to just check in on her comfort level. And she has been very clear the entire way that she wants this book out there. And I do say in the acknowledgments that, yeah, it's not ideal for these kids, these trans kids across the whole country, to have their private lives out there. But she and many kids also are doing it so that they can have rights, really.
Yeah, I really feel so indebted to people who will share their stories and also really supportive of people who aren't in a position where they can. I think it does require a certain level of privilege to be able to share this stuff. So the people that can, I'm so glad that they do.
I agree, totally.
Yeah. Well, your book starts out with something unusual about your own family and your father. You came to understand never actually wanted children, but between his two marriages, he ended up having 8, including you. So this is a guy who, what do you think about that? Why did he wind up with so many, having not really wanted kids?
Well, I'm not really sure if he really didn't want kids or not. That was just what I was told, from my mother. And when you grow up with divorced parents, it's really hard to make sense of what's real and what's not. There's all kinds of stories. People have very different realities and different memories of the same thing. So I'm not really sure if he really wanted them or what he would say to that.
So you've never been like, hey, Dad, did you want me? That'd be kind of a difficult conversation. I don't know how many people would do that.
I haven't bothered. I'm not sure about this, but it seems to me that at the time when I was growing up, I was born in 1980, and I felt like it was rare for people to have married parents and to not have divorce and blended families. But yeah, mine was very big because of divorce and then more kids through a second marriage, that sort of thing.
Yeah, he had 3 kids with your mom and then 3 step kids with a new wife, and then he also had 2 more kids with that. So as you said, it's a big family, and That's going to matter. We're going to bring up some of these family members that play an important part in the story, but I want to talk about place here. I want to talk about Guilford, New Hampshire, because Guilford is an important character in the book. Your family's roots go deep there, and you felt a deep connection to that place, which I think made it all the more tragic that it harmed your family so badly. So talk about your roots in New Hampshire.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in rural New Hampshire, and my family had been there for hundreds of years, and I always felt really connected to the land. I had a pretty difficult childhood because of many factors, largely because of divorce, but I always had this pride in where I was from, and I felt I really understood the place I was from. I felt I belonged there. So Guilford is where my husband and I lived, and it's the town that my father grew up in, and it's this beautiful lake and mountain town. My grandparents had bought property on an island there in the 1950s. They lived in the town, but then they bought Vacation Island property in the 1950s, and that became really a family sanctuary. So my grandfather moved an old boys' summer camp cabin out to this property that he had bought, and I think he bought the property for like $5,000.
Yeah.
It was just a summer camp sanctuary for us. So I grew up going out on the lake in this family boat. There, it's always just like a clunker boat. And we would go out there, and we were really wild and unsupervised. But it was this magical spot that felt like an escape from all the drama and, frankly, trauma of our lives, of going back and forth between parents, having parents embroiled in constant court battles. And we would just swim in the lake and just look at the mountains. And it was such a place of peace for all of us. And also in Guilford was the ski area. And my grandparents would buy us all season passes there every year. Well, not including my youngest siblings. They were too young, so I would have been the youngest. And my father would drop us off there. And I mean, I was young.
Yeah. I remember one scene where like he didn't really even send you with food or anything. You're like sitting in this cabin and all these kids are eating food around you and you're starving, but you also love to be on the mountain, so it's okay. But you also wonder, like, there were other parents around. How did they not see these scroungy little kids that weren't eating?
Yeah, I mean, I think he started dropping us off there when I was 6. And he drove this big blue van, and we would just all pile out. And my stepsister and I were put on the ski team. All the other kids were just skiing all day, free skiing.
Yeah.
But my stepsister and I were on the team, and I loved it. I absolutely loved ski racing. It was the mountain where my father had learned to ski. My grandfather had taught him. My family had been involved in that ski mountain for so long that I really felt, even though we were freezing and ill cared for and we had no food, I felt like I belonged there.
You say that it even helped you heal from, you talk about in the book some childhood sexual abuse or some sexual trauma that you experienced, that the outdoors, the mountain could be healing for you.
Absolutely. I wasn't aware of it as a child. I wasn't aware of what dissociation was as a child. But I spent hours upon hours, I mean, truly most of my life somewhere on the ceiling, like floating above my body. But on the ski hill, I was in my body, and I felt such power because of that.
Makes me wonder, like, why you did end up going away. You went away for school, right? Did you think you would be coming back home? What was your thinking as you were getting to that stage of life where you have to really start thinking about where home is going to be?
Yeah, I don't think that I thought about it consciously. Like, I don't think I had a plan that I was going to go back to New Hampshire and build this life, but I think I knew deep inside me that I would. I was recently talking to a college friend, and she was like, Abby, we all always knew that that is where you would be, that I carried with me just such a deep connection to the place that I was from. I mean, I lived in Wisconsin for college, and then I went to Montana and random other places in the West for a while, just kind of exploring things. And I always had this sense that nothing was real, that I wasn't living my life until I was really back in New Hampshire, and not just in New Hampshire, but back in that specific place of the mountains and the lake.
So while you were away, you meet Paul, who becomes your husband. You met in Montana. You're going to school there. And it was kind of this nice liberal town in Montana, so you have great memories of that place. Even though it's a very conservative state, you lived in kind of a liberal area where you felt free to explore and learn.
Yeah.
And that time of life is great. But you did end up back in New Hampshire, and that's where you discovered that you were pregnant. And your first reaction to that was to just feel sick with anxiety because you told a close friend you thought a baby would ruin you. What was going through your head when you found out you were pregnant?
I had just sold my first novel. I had always wanted to be a writer, and I felt like I finally had the chance to do that. And I remember that my dog at that time, he was this old dog who I would just caretake so much. I mean, I would give every bit of myself to make sure that dog was okay. I would have to carry him home on walks and hand feed him, and I would just give so much of myself. So I was really afraid when I became pregnant that I was going to entirely lose myself, that I didn't know how I was going to still be a writer or just live my life. And also, I had a really hard childhood and did not have a clear example of what it could look like to be a healthy adult parent.
It doesn't sound like it's setting you much up for success just yet, but you were in New Hampshire, you were in a familiar place, you felt you were at home, and you talk about in the book the ultrasound, where the ultrasound tech reveals the gender, right? This big moment that people still have today. And all along up to that point, you'd been picturing a girl. The ultrasound tech proclaimed that it was a boy. And at this point in your life, you weren't really very aware of transgender folks.
Correct.
And you say you probably couldn't even define the word at that point.
I remember somebody saying that they had a transgender daughter. And I remember thinking, I don't know if that means that the person is male or female or what their pronouns would be. I really, really didn't know. I was totally unfamiliar. And I will say that I also didn't know that I was unfamiliar with it. Like I thought that I was very progressive. I volunteered to get out the vote and that sort of thing. But I had no real understanding.
And for people that are still wondering or kind of in that place themselves, if someone says they have a transgender daughter, that usually means that they have a child that was assigned male at birth who is transgender and identifies usually with she, her pronouns. So, or a transgender son would be someone who was assigned female at birth who is transitioning and now uses he, him pronouns. So people usually, if they say have a transgender daughter, that means this is a daughter that they have, right? And as you said, you're kind of a progressive person. You got a job at this really idyllic library there. You're kind of living this idyllic life, this beautiful small town library. It seems so cool. And as you were looking through catalogs for books one day that the library might purchase, there was another librarian who said, I don't buy any of this gay stuff. If it says LGB, whatever, you can just skip it. And people here don't read that. And in that moment, you thought about your gay brother, Noah, who was a half-brother of yours. He came to mind, but you also decided not to say anything in that moment. Why?
I still didn't understand what it really meant. I didn't understand the human cost of essentially banning books. I mean, that if you aren't buying books by a certain type of population, you're essentially banning them from the library. And I didn't understand. I did not understand what my brother had been through, what other LGBTQ people had been through. And I just thought, oh, she's from another time. She doesn't mean any harm. I didn't know what it looked like to truly be an ally.
Your personal experience would really bring it home, what it meant to be an ally. As your daughter began to grow up, in the first few years of your daughter's life, you came to understand that she was different from a lot of kids, not even necessarily related to gender identity. And not just because she preferred to get dresses out of the dress-up box at the library. She seemed neurodivergent. What were you and your husband experiencing with your kid that seemed kind of against the grain or unexpected as a parent that led you to suspect that they might be neurodivergent?
It started when she was really quite young, and I think if we were in a different area with better medical care, we would have understood much earlier. Honestly, I think it started the day she was born, and she was put in that crib thing where they do a hearing test in the hospital.
That like plastic bin looking thing or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And she wasn't responding. They kept having to redo the test. And eventually she did respond and they knew she could hear.
Yeah.
But that hearing test thing continued when she was 2, 3, 4. We kept having to take her in for more hearing tests because she just wouldn't respond to us. And she would do fine on the tests every time. She was a late talker. She didn't speak until she was 2, which was, not very late, but it was late. And then she would have very specific interests. My father gave her a garbage truck when she was probably 3, and she played with that toy and nothing else for years.
Yeah.
And I think it was her 4th birthday party that she asked her friends to bring trash. And we had this chute. My brother gave us this pipe and we hooked it up on the porch down to the ground, and she would put the trash that her friends brought through the chute and down into these little cans.
Yeah.
So it was that kind of thing, but it was also sort of not such fun things. I mean, just behaviorally, she was very, very aggressive, and she would hit and scream and melt down, and she didn't sleep until she was well into kindergarten, at least halfway through the year, if not more. She would sleep from longest maybe 3 to 4 hour stints. So
I imagine it can feel kind of isolating for you and your partner to know your kid very well, know what it's like to experience them, and probably experiencing judgment from other parents, or like, what the heck's wrong with this kid, or and wondering yourself, like, is it something, what did I do, or what's going on here? It can be pretty isolating.
Yeah, it was very isolating, and a part of the isolation is knowing how wonderful she is in her own home and seeing how engaged and kind and brilliant she is, and then going out into the world and trying to have these social interactions and just feeling like it's just so hard for her, and people are just not getting it and not getting to see her true self.
How did gender issues start popping up? How did you start to notice that there might be something different for her when it came to her gender identity?
The first thing that I remember very clearly was when she was 4 and we went into the shoe store to buy her a new pair of shoes. And before this, she always got the hand-me-downs from my friends who were all boys, and she didn't really complain about it, although she never wanted to get dressed, and it was always a battle. But she didn't communicate why, and probably wasn't able to.
Yeah.
But we went into the shoe store, and she just said very matter-of-factly, "Where's the girls section?" And this was the first time I had taken her shopping, to be clear.
Because it would be difficult, right?
Yeah.
Because it's so difficult sometimes to be doing that.
Yes.
Wow. So she immediately wanted the girl section. Let's go.
Yeah. And I said, "Why do you want the girl section?" And she said, "I want pink shoes." And my daughter is somebody who comes to the world without an innate understanding or respect for social structures. So I thought, oh yeah, she just doesn't care about these stupid rules we have about colors, and we got her the pink shoes. And after that, she said a lot, "I want to grow my hair out. I want hair like a girl's. I want to wear dresses." And then it just kept amping up. She would say, "Why do you make me be a boy? Can people change? I'm a girl. I want to be a girl." And to the point where by the time she was in 1st grade, she just started telling kids on the playground that she was a girl. And this was before we had allowed her to socially transition. So she still had her old name, her old pronouns, but she started telling kids she was a girl. And her 1st grade teacher called me into the school pretty early, I believe, in the year, and was showing me all this artwork that our daughter had done that was all self-portraits of her as a girl. And I realized then that every time she chose like a little avatar for school programs or in a video game at home, it was always female. And again, I just wrote it off as, she just kind of sees the world differently than we do. But, she just made it clearer and clearer. And then eventually, as she was making it clearer and clearer, she was also getting more and more miserable that we weren't recognizing her as a girl. And eventually we learned and got help, professional help, and allowed her to socially transition.
And in the book, you don't come across as the superhero mom that was just ready to jump on board. You're really vulnerable in disclosing things that you're ashamed of now.
Yeah.
The fears and the resistance that you put up. Talk about what it's like to disclose that. And for parents that might be going through it, what kind of feelings did you experience as you started to really reckon with this kid being transgender?
I mean, there's so many elements to that. I think one part of it is the culture that I lived in. I don't think I realized how oppressive a small New England town culture can be and how much of an effect it had on me, and particularly one that was so manicured as the town that I lived in. Very white, straight, conservative, perfectly done lawns, that sort of thing. And it's a very oppressive culture. So a lot of my fear about my daughter was fear of what other people would think, fear that she would be bullied. A lot of it was internalized just transphobia from years of just being in our culture. I didn't understand. I didn't believe that she was a girl because I didn't understand what that was. I just did not have any familiarity with it.
Did you ever wonder, like, a kid's too young to even be thinking about this? They're just, and your kid was neurodivergent. So there's two reasons why a parent might say, oh, you know what? They're just a little kid. They don't know what's going on. And maybe they're neurodivergent.
Yeah. I mean, the neurodivergent part for sure. I thought that at first. I thought, oh, she as I said, like she just doesn't.
She doesn't get these codes. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think I also was reminded of when I was a kid and went through a phase of wanting to be a boy and that sort of thing. And I think the big thing is there was just no representation around me. I didn't know trans people. I didn't know trans kids. I just had no familiarity with it. And frankly, I was afraid of all the wrong things. Like I was afraid to support her, afraid to let her be herself. When really the terrifying thing is if I hadn't. And now, I am so sad that we made her be miserable for a couple of years when she was very clear about who she was.
And how did her transition start to pick up steam? Because you did feel those fears, that resistance. What steps happened to actually kind of move it along, and what kind of changes did you notice for her?
She started asking more and more for dresses and to grow her hair. I put her in a dance class, and that was a very gendered situation. They would line the boys up in one spot and the girls in the other. And my daughter would have a meltdown every time because she was put with the boys instead of the girls. And she wanted the girls' shoes, and I didn't buy them for her, which, I mean, looking back on it, I just think, how in the world did I let my fear of judgment have that much power? But I didn't buy her the girls' shoes. And being in that gendered space, I think really gave her an occasion to speak up about her gender. So the dance class really brought some things to light. When it came time for her dance recital, they handed out the costumes, and the girls got some, big hair bow thing and their fancy dress costumes. And they gave the boys, just like this boring t-shirt and a vest. And my daughter just threw the costume and yelled, "Why do the girls get all the good stuff?" And then she was refusing to do the dance recital, and I kept asking her about it. And finally, she said that she wouldn't do it because of the dumb boy costume. And I said, wait, it would be less embarrassing for you to wear the girl's costume? And she said, duh, that's the costume I'm supposed to have. And that really woke something up in me where I thought, oh my goodness, how have I blinded myself so much to what this child is saying to me? And especially for a child for whom communication is hard. And she was just trying so hard. So we went to see her therapist, and she learned the word transgender. My daughter did. And she was like, yeah, great. That's what I am. But I was still really afraid and still didn't let her change her name and pronouns. But around this time, that's when she started just doing it herself at school.
I wanted to ask you about that meeting with the therapist because it kind of seemed similar to the autism diagnosis. Like you were happy to have a framework and a description. And obviously your child was, I don't know if we've mentioned Greta is the name used in the book here. So Greta, as you said, seemed like, oh yeah, okay, cool. Had a category now. So you were happy to have a framework, but you were also really worried about the struggle that it would be.
Yeah.
So with autism, it's the same. Like, okay, this gives me an understanding of what's going on here, but also it means life's going to be different than I thought it would be, or we're going to have to do these other things, and there's going to be oppression that we'll face. And your immediate reaction was so divided. This really stayed with me. On the one hand, you immediately went and asked your mother and brother to accept it. You went to them and you just said, listen, this is what it is, and I just need you to support it. I'm not here to defend it. I just need you to believe this and be with me. And they couldn't do it right away. But then at the same time, on the other hand, you were angry at your husband for being so immediately affirming. He came out of her bedroom that night and said, hey, I just had this amazing conversation with her and told her that she was a great daughter. And you said, can we please just slow down? So to your mom and brother, you're like, get on board today. And then to Paul, you're like, can we please just put the brakes on?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, again, that I was afraid, again, of all the wrong things. I think in that moment, I wasn't afraid of the oppression that she would face. I wasn't aware of it, even. I mean, at that time, her rights were not on the national stage. And so it wasn't something... And not the way that we see them today. I mean, these bills against her rights are just multiplying every year.
Yeah, there was one in North Carolina, the bathroom thing, and it kind of got squashed a little bit at that time.
Yeah.
But then it's really come back with a vengeance nationally.
Yeah, so it wasn't all of that stuff that I was afraid of. That's what I should have been afraid of, this like straight culture that would destroy her. I was just afraid of... It's hard to even say what. It's hard to know what exactly I was afraid of. I was ignorant. I didn't want to mess her up, right? I wanted to do the right thing. And it's really hard when your child is telling you who they are and you have no familiarity with it. You have no examples of what that looks like. And your entire culture around you is telling you that's not real.
Yeah.
I mean, that is self-doubt, I guess. I mean, because everyone's telling me that this is wrong, this is not real, this doesn't exist, that sort of thing.
There's also a moment where you meet with another specialist who kind of starts to talk to you a little bit about possible medical transition things for the future. I mean, Greta was really young at this point, so there aren't surgical things, there aren't...
No.
You don't have to worry about puberty blockers or hormone therapy until puberty's coming on. So there was some years to go, but that conversation really scared you. And you say, I just wanted Greta to stay 6 years old forever. And I could relate to that so much, even aside from trans issues, of thinking of the difficulties our kids are going to face and just kind of wanting to lock them in this moment of their lives when they seem so innocent and just so full of life. And so the fear was real for you when you had to think about not just social transition, but possible future medical transition things.
Yeah. And again, I mean, I can't say it enough times. I was afraid of all the wrong things. Like, truly what's terrifying is a lack of access to medicine. Why on earth would I be afraid of medicine that will help my daughter live her life? life and be a happy and whole person in the world. Why would I be afraid of that?
This was part of your fears too, right? Because you started you were online, you were reading what you could, you were looking at message boards, you were trying to figure it out. And what you were learning also scared you, like the high rate of suicide attempts and the high rate of suicidal ideation that trans kids face. So now you're thinking, oh, this is also really scary.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But what I didn't know was the real fear, which is what culture is doing right now, what these state legislatures across the country are doing right now to these kids.
And it came to the fore really quick after you went to visit this specialist that really kind of confirmed transgender identity and was talking to you about possible medical things. That same day, your phone blew up because there was a school board meeting.
Yeah.
You know, Greta's preparing to enter the 2nd grade, and now you have to start thinking about practical things like the bathrooms that Greta's going to use. And she'd been at a summer camp and ended up wetting her pants because of difficult bathroom logistics and problems. And New Hampshire had signed a law protecting trans people's access to bathrooms, which might have seemed like the end of it. In fact, the school sent out a message from the superintendent saying, all right, the schools are going to comply with the law. We're going to make bathrooms gender inclusive. But you found out they were not going to stick to that original plan. What happened?
Well, the law that was signed was a non-discrimination law that included transgender people. And it was a non-discrimination law that applied to public schools. The year before, there had been a law signed in that applied to just public spaces. So once I learned about that law through a PFLAG group, I went to the school and said, my daughter wants to use the girls' bathroom, and to comply with the law, you have to let her. And so once she entered 2nd grade, school board meetings about her erupted in my town. And they were about her bathroom access, locker room access, whether or not she could play on sports teams, but also her right to be called by her name, to be called by her pronouns. So the school board meetings started immediately when she entered the 2nd grade, and parents were just coming out of the woodwork saying that she was a threat to the community, that she didn't have the right to be called by her pronouns because they didn't necessarily believe her pronouns, or that it was against their religion, that she was a danger in the bathrooms, that she was a danger on the sports field, all of this stuff. And it was endless, month after month after month, because the school board was trying to pass a policy that would protect her and comply with the law. But people were coming out to fight against that policy.
And one of the couples who worked the hardest against your daughter's rights also kind of tried to play it both ways. It seemed like they tried to send signals of support to you. I'm thinking of Katie, is what she's called in the book, this mother who sent you an email at one point saying she was really concerned because she found out that maybe Greta was getting bullied at school, and that was not okay with her and her husband, so what can we do? They didn't obviously bring up the fact that they were a huge part of the opposition to your daughter accessing the bathroom that she needed to use, even going so far as to hiring a lawyer to help their case. So it's like she's reaching out to you to signal some kind of weird support while she's also opposing the rights of your daughter. And I mean, here's a part. I'll actually have you read this because you wrote a letter to her that you didn't end up sending. And this gets to your feelings at that point in time and the really strong feelings you had. So maybe we can have you read that from the book here.
Sure. And I just want to add that while these school board meetings were going on, they, of course, were trickling down. And so my daughter was being bullied so badly at school. And it was like a perfect storm. I mean, she was being bullied and she would explode. And I was getting called into the school day after day. And she was just not getting the help she needed at school. So.
But Katie's going to help, remember? She's going to solve the bullying for you.
Yeah. And this was a woman who I had known, not well, but had known because I worked at the library. I saw her all the time. We always had nice conversations. I knew her husband. And so she sends me this letter saying she wanted to sit down with me to help learn how to teach her children to be allies. So I'll read the letter that I wrote back to her, although did not send.
Well, it's sent now if she's going to read, but yes, please.
Katie, I am truly unclear about what you want from me. I cannot be the person to teach you that what you are doing is actively bullying children. But until you see that, you will not be able to teach your children how to be allies. I am not sorry that you cried today. You should cry. You should also know that my husband and I have spent every day since the first school board meeting at which you spoke out in a state of inability to function because we are either crying or so angry that we cannot see straight. You should know that you and your husband are a part of the reason we are figuring out how to leave this town and get our daughter to a place that is safe for her. You need to know that you speaking out is a part of the reason that the school will not teach our children the word transgender, will not even allow it in the classroom, which leaves my child in constant fear, leaves her coming home and telling me that she understands that most of the world hates transgender people like her. You and your husband are a part of the reason that I am afraid all day while my child is at school. And I am 100% sure that my child is the only one in that whole entire school who is afraid to use the bathroom. You need to understand that what you and your husband are doing is essentially saying to a 7-year-old child that her basic needs are not justified and that you do not accept who she is. And the impact of that is long-term. It is not a game to have a transgender child, Katie. It is not some fun thing for you to speak up in your town about. Imagine if you had a child who had a 50% chance of suicide. Imagine if you had a child who was already bullied every single day for her identity, yet that identity was easier for her than showing up as a boy, because being a boy was so painful and untrue to her core being. Can you imagine what you are doing when you tell that child that she alone, and no other child in the school, needs to walk all the way to the nurse to use the bathroom because adults in her town think there is something strange or sick or scary about her, something dangerous about her? How do you tell your child that? Tell me how that is ever anything other than bullying a child. If you want to learn, do some research. Read a book. I know you are in touch with Christopher, and he is a model of how to confront a topic and educate yourself and learn how to be an ally. It is not hard. You do not have to read much. There is so much research out there. Every bit of reliable research ever done on this all says the same thing, Katie. What you and your husband are standing up for is dangerous and destructive and life-threatening to children. Do not ever talk to me again unless you first make a public apology for your actions on behalf of all the students in our district. Abby.
That's Abby Maxwell, reading from her memoir, One Day I'll Grow Up and Be a Beautiful Woman. Abby's the author of novels like Lake People and The Den, and after graduating from the writing program at the University of Montana, she spent many years working in libraries and is a dedicated advocate for the rights of transgender youth. There's a number of things in this letter, Abby, that I wanted to touch on. First, that you say you and your husband have spent every day since that first school board meeting in a state of inability to function. This was really hard on your marriage. Paul, your husband, was so supportive, but it also sent him spiraling. He experienced anger and thoughts of like violence or just things that didn't seem like him, that completely caught him off guard and kind of divided him from you. This was hard on your relationship. That's the first thing I want to point out.
Yeah, it was so hard. I mean, to be unable to protect your child because your neighbors, your community is standing up against her. It's terrifying to have to feel like you have to keep your blinds drawn. And I remember that we would hear a noise outside and think it was a gunshot. I mean, we were really going through PTSD.
Yeah, remember that guy that made that weird comment, like, I wish I could go pick that child up and take, like, he made this wacky comment that made you think that someone could actually try to take your child.
Yeah, I didn't know. It was just all of the sudden, you know, in the summer, my daughter transitions. We learned a lot. She's suddenly happy and free.
A lot of the anger's gone, yeah.
Yeah, truly transformed overnight. And she was so excited to go back into school and tell children who she was, to tell them her new name. She was so proud. And then all of a sudden, our town just erupted in these vicious battles. And it wasn't just battles about whether or not trans people should be allowed to use the bathrooms and locker rooms, that sort of thing, which would have been horrific as it is. But it was about her specifically. People were talking about her specifically at these public school board meetings, and they were writing about her in the newspapers. And it was terrifying. I mean, my husband just descended, and this was also right after my husband had had a major hip surgery. And so he was in a wheelchair during this time. And he just descended into this dark, dark hole, this corner. And I went into my own version of that, which is just like
survival mode.
Yeah. And just like constant like research and like my brain constantly spinning, constantly trying to take care of everything, always on guard. And my daughter also, I mean, and we're still all dealing with the ramifications of it.
Exactly. I mean, by the end of the book, things improve with Paul, but it's clear that damage is done that will be reckoned with for a really long time. And another point from the letter is where you talk about how the school won't teach children the word transgender. So you found out there was this sort of secret policy that they came up with, that they weren't even supposed to say the word transgender. They banned that word. And that's the school ultimately overturned that, right? But that wasn't a moment of celebration for you. Why not?
My daughter was having a horrible time at school. I mean, she was being bullied every single day.
And by the way, the bullying was basically like people insisting that she was a boy and using the dead name and doing like, weird, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yep. And she said, Mom, why won't the teachers help? Why won't they just read a book? And I kept reaching out to the school and saying, what books are being read? What language is being used to help her? And then one day she said, Mom, they can't help because they don't know the word transgender. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I had had many meetings with them before she went into the school with her new name and pronouns. And so I contacted them and said, she says that you're not using the word transgender. Is that true? And I kept asking and not getting an answer. And finally I got the answer that the word transgender couldn't be used in the school setting because the superintendent had made this rule based on a private school board meeting.
Basically to appease the parents that were complaining, right? The parents would say, this, you can't do this, and they caved to that and tried to hide it from you. So, yeah.
Yeah, and at that point, the ACLU of New Hampshire and also GLAAD, which is an LGBTQ rights organization out of Massachusetts, got involved. And they sort of got to the bottom of that. So the ACLU and GLAAD sort of held the superintendent to account for that. And he said, oh, that never happened. Of course, this word can be used, that sort of thing. I mean, his letter is in my book, exactly what he said. That's not a direct quote. And I thought, what garbage, but also, yes, that's what we need him to say. And that did help because right after that, when my daughter was bullied, the guidance counselor taught the boy who was bullying her what transgender was, taught him the word, and that there were kids like my daughter in the world. And she wasn't bullied by him again. However, that was right before the shutdown.
Yeah, COVID's on the way.
That's part of it, the COVID shutdown. And also, I think I just realized, like, yes, we need the laws and the policies, but that's not enough. We also need a culture that will stand up for those laws and policies.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to think about, like, if we're saying that this information is inappropriate, then we're saying that my child is inappropriate. And that, like, no, she's a child just like any other.
Yeah, and that's the next point I wanted to draw out of this letter is how you point out, imagine if you had a child who was already bullied every single day for her identity, yet still that identity was easier for her than showing up as a boy. This is a persistent and deep identity for these kids. And living with the bullying it's so much weight on them, but they still want to try in the face of that. And you also point out, the last thing that I'll say from the letter, and there's so many different things we could talk about, is you say if you want to learn, do some research. Don't put it all on the parents of these kids or on the kids themselves. There is a lot of resources that people can check out. They can read your memoir. They can read other memoirs by trans folks. And I really recommend reading the experiences of trans people themselves. Your book's important because you're coming from a parent's perspective, and we need to hear that.
Yeah.
We also really need to pay attention to the voices of trans folks. My disappointment in the New York Times, for example, is so deep because a lot of their terrible reporting, I think, is the outcome of not having trans reporters, not having trans columnists, not actually involving any of the people that their reporting is supposedly talking about. We need to hear from people themselves to really get their stories.
Yeah, and I think I kept having to be put in situations where I had 5 minutes or less or 2 minutes or less to defend my daughter's humanity and explain to these people why she required rights just like anybody else and why she was a full human. And you can't do that in the space of 5 minutes or 2 minutes.
No.
And, it started with school board fights and then it turned into legislative battles on the state level. And I just thought, I know you people. I know who you are. I know how you grew up. New Hampshire's a very insular community, a very insular state. And, I didn't get it either. But I know you can get it if you just listen, if you just look at what this is like, look into my home, get to know me and my daughter's story, then you will get it and you will stop doing what you're doing. You don't understand the harm you're causing.
And you saw this happen firsthand. You saw this with your own mother, right? Who was very resistant to the idea and then started to actually understand and come around and become a really fierce advocate for your child.
Yeah, absolutely. And same of most people in my life. And I will say that none of the people in my life are ever people who would have spoken out against anyone's rights.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But they were uncomfortable.
This is the problem, Abby. The silent, I think, majority, right? I think the vocal transphobic people that we hear, I could be wrong, but I get the impression that they are in the minority that are so upset about this. Then I think we have a lot of people in the middle who are just maybe uncomfortable with it, don't know what to do with it, maybe want to avoid it, are not going to learn about it, and are also then not going to be there for the people who need them to be there for them as supports. There's so many, even people that would pull you aside, you mentioned, that would just say like, hey, we're thinking of you, and sure, that's nice to hear, but say something. Go to the school board meeting. Why am I the one you're thinking that has to be up there talking all the time? Don't just tell me behind everyone's back that you think what I'm doing is great. Be here with me.
Absolutely. And we were fighting these school board meetings in 2019. And then in 2020, we realized we had to fight the same thing on the state level. And then 2021, it was more bills. And every year after that, it's been more and more and more. And so, I mean, this book is really my plea for somebody else to come out, because it was taking years off my life and my husband's life to always be fighting this. I mean, just this constant terrorization.
We desperately need
other
people to learn and to speak, both.
Yeah, people who don't have a personal stake in the game, really. Because we wore out. I mean, this past year, I wore out and I said no to all requests for advocacy at the state level. Because I truly did not think I could survive another year. And so I thought, okay, well, we can stay in New Hampshire in our home if I just block it out. But of course, like, the math of that is wrong. Like, I can't block it out. These are actual laws that affect my daughter. And they passed, and we had to leave the state. So
Exactly. We'll talk a little bit more about what happened there. But first, I want to take you to a Thanksgiving dinner that you write about. And this is where you went to your father's house, and there's cousins and stuff there. And there's a distant cousin that starts asking questions about it.
Yeah.
And these are the kind of questions that parents of trans kids are probably just kind of sick of hearing. Like, oh, have you thought about maybe they just like girls' clothes? Or, oh, don't you think this is kind of a fad? Or they could grow out of this. Or the one that's like, I just think people should learn to love their bodies as they are. It's this like body positivity turned into transphobia.
Yeah.
And you felt trapped.
Is.
Are there any other what other kind of questions come to mind to you that, like, the offensive kind of questions that you're like, oh, if they're asking it, it means they haven't engaged in the subject yet.
I mean, there are just so many, and I don't want people to feel like they're nervous and can't ask questions, I suppose.
True.
Like, I want people to learn, and so I don't know how exactly to put this, but I mean, I guess it's like, well, as I put in the letter, like, just read a book if you're nervous. Just,
Start
there maybe.
Also, I think ask yourself why you're asking the question.
Yes.
Because if you're asking the question to suggest the right way to be, like, don't you think they might just like girls' clothes? But what you're really thinking is, this is a kid that doesn't know what they're doing and they probably just like girls' clothes. Or maybe you as a parent have been fooled and, why are they asking that?
I think that's such a good point because that's exactly it. Why are you asking that? And if you dig deep enough, you see that the reason you're asking it is, A, you think you know something more than this person does about themselves. And B, you don't believe this person is who they say they are.
Right.
And also, like, why do you care? Like, why?
What's it to you?
What's it to you? Can we just trust that people know themselves?
Well, I'll say, I think some people are afraid that they don't want their own kids to be trans, and that there's this contagion idea that goes around that transgender ideology will catch on, right? So people have those kind of fears.
100%.
If they would look at the research, they would find out that that's just not the case. Plenty of kids become trans without even knowing any trans
I mean,
people
my daughter.
or knowing the trans. Yeah, right. So, okay, so let's go back to this Thanksgiving dinner because you're getting these questions and you're already just feeling like, oh, I don't want to be here now. Like it ruined the dinner for you. But there's a sister-in-law there, ironically, one that you never even really got along with very well, who jumped in kind of to your defense, and you were so grateful of her jumping to your defense. But you also decided that you'd never go back. You felt like, I'm never going back to another Thanksgiving dinner. So why wasn't that ally's presence enough to keep you going back?
I think that there comes a time when you get tired of defending your child's humanity, your child's full humanity. You get tired of trying to convince people that she's a girl. She's just a full girl like any other. And she's also a transgender girl. But it just...
And she's more than that, too, which they're overlooking. Like, why does this happen?
Right. Yeah. It's really not the most interesting thing about her. I mean, it's way more interesting to talk to her about, like, her Lego builds.
Yeah.
And I just get tired of constantly defending who she is, how we parent. And yeah.
It's good to have that ally, but it's also still feels like an environment where there's not a true welcome, I think. And I also tend to think parents have talked about feeling a certain danger there. Their kids are already in transphobic situations enough to where why would you actively choose to keep putting them in more transphobic situations if you didn't have to?
Yeah. I mean, I think that my family is full of liberal people. They're very proud of their liberal values. But I think that there are people in my family, a lot of members of my family, maybe all of them, other than those who are closest to me, who don't have a lot of familiarity, just like I didn't have familiarity with it. They just have a lot of transphobia that they have gotten from the culture they grew up in, and they haven't done the work to try not to be transphobic. They haven't done the work to learn and to see my daughter for who she is. And so they have a lot of questions. And that's not something I want to field on Thanksgiving. It's really something that it's part of why I wrote the book. I mean, I know people will understand and they'll speak up if they understand.
And again, the book is called One Day I'll Grow Up and Be a Beautiful Woman, A Mother's Story by Abby Maxwell. You know, Abby, this talk about your family reminds me of Noah, who we spoke of earlier. This is your gay half-brother, and you included his story kind of side by side with your daughter's story. You two had kind of drifted apart over the years, but you reached out to him for guidance when your daughter was beginning to wear dresses. And I wondered if you would read this part from the book, because I think it speaks a lot to this dynamic that you said of being like a liberal, progressive person, but trans stuff isn't necessarily landing with you yet. So let's hear about Noah a little bit.
Sure. I was 28 years old, 4 years away from parenthood, when I first watched Milk, the film about LGBTQ plus rights activist Harvey Milk. It was 2008. It would be another 7 years before marriage equality even became law in the United States. Paul and I had been in our upstairs apartment in Missoula, lounging on the futon after a long day cross-country skiing on the other side of the mountain pass. We'd rented the movie on a whim, without thinking about how heavy it would be. We sat there stoned, eating heaping bowls of ice cream while I cried soundlessly, tears soaking my face as I thought of my brother. The movie had an afterword that flashed statistics: the extremely high percentage of gay men who struggled with addiction, the extremely high percentage who had attempted suicide. I paused the movie to back up and read them all again. The statistics astounded me. How had I never put it together before that Noah lived in a completely different world from the rest of our family, that the doors that had always been open to us had never been open to him? It wasn't something our family had ever discussed. Noah was gay. Of course we loved and accepted him, and that was the end of the conversation. But I read those statistics, and finally I realized that my little brother, whose laugh I still miss, had not been born with a troubled brain, that his struggles were actually society's struggles. Why hadn't I learned this earlier? Why hadn't we all? And what about him? Had he learned this? Has he now? Or has he spent his entire life believing the problem is within him?
So this is a supportive family, in a sense, knew that Noah was gay, expressed love, and expressed acceptance, but it kind of stopped there. And this is a really important point that your book brings out, that loving someone is not the same as fully being there for them.
Yeah.
And he even internalized some homophobia. There's a part where he says, hey, I'm not one of these flag-waving F words, the F-A-G,
Yeah.
right? And maybe, what if your family had flown a flag? What if they even had a flag somewhere in the house? It didn't even have to be public, but a way to signal more support than just like, hey, you're gay, it doesn't really matter. Because homophobia did matter. And this is when Matthew Shepard was murdered. There, long before gay marriage was legal. When people, I used the F word in high school all the time. I didn't even really know what it was. And so there's a difference between loving and accepting your kid and being there for them and advocating for a better society for them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And when my daughter transitioned, I thought of my little brother so much and how I could have been there for him, how he was facing struggles that the rest of us weren't facing. And we all had a difficult childhood. Everyone in my family did. But his struggles were a different level. And I didn't get it. I didn't get it until I was late in my 20s, honestly.
You mentioned in the letter that I had you read earlier, Christopher. This is was he a pastor? I don't remember what denomination this was. Yeah, so this is a pastor who became an advocate, and he had a son who was gay who died by suicide.
Yeah.
And he became an important ally to you, maybe an unexpected one. When people think of religious folks, especially a religious person in such a conservative town, for him to be an advocate and an ally must have been pretty special for you.
Yeah, I wasn't connected to the church at all, but my grandparents had been members of that church since, I think, 1940, the year they got married. And it was very important to her. So I'd been over the years with my grandparents, and my grandmother was an organ player there, and she had loved this new pastor. He was new when I was a teenager. She had loved him. And so I reached out to him when the town was really exploding with school board fights, because we lived in my grandparents' house at that point. My grandmother had passed away, and so my grandfather and my husband and I bought her house. And I just thought of her and what she would do if she were there. She was a really special person to me. And I reached out to him because I knew that's what she would tell me to do. And he supported us immediately and truly did everything he could. He hosted book discussions. He hosted panels with transgender people on them. He brought a doctor, an endocrinologist from Dartmouth Hospital who worked with trans patients. He brought her to the church for a public forum. He truly did everything he could.
it was really heartening to see that you weren't completely alone. And I know that the overall culture was so oppressive that you ended up having to leave.
Yeah.
But it was nice to see a few people that understood and that were there with you.
Yeah. I mean, we had a couple friends who really supported us every step of the way. And then the pastor. Yeah.
So as things are coming to a head, you're starting to feel like you can't stay. You've decided maybe you'll go back to Montana. And this is the plan for a while. You set a date. You talked to Greta about it. This was the plan. But as that plan approached, as it was approaching, you decided to look some things up online and discovered it was not going to be possible. And I want to run down the list with people so they get a sense of all the different legal implications that families like yours face when they have a trans child. You looked it up, and housing. The state doesn't prohibit housing discrimination based on sexual identity or gender orientation. Employment. The state doesn't prohibit employment discrimination. Hate crimes. There's no laws that address hate or bias crimes based on sexual orientation or gender identity. Public accommodations. The state doesn't prohibit discrimination in public accommodations and things like bathrooms. School anti-bullying. There's no laws that address harassment or bullying of students based on gender identity. Education. There's no law that addresses discrimination against students based on sexual orientation and gender identity. Anti-conversion therapy. The state doesn't protect youth from discredited modes of conversion therapy that lead to high suicide rates and deep psychological damage, trying to convert people away from being gay or being trans. So that's just a snapshot of the type of considerations. And Montana didn't have any of that. New Hampshire's gotten worse. Where I live here in Utah, it's getting worse. And we're seeing a huge increase. You say that by 2022, there was an 800% increase over 4 years of bills across the country. And it just seems like these families are literally under attack. And fortunately, you've had the ability to move. You're now joining us from California.
Correct.
But there are also families who can't, and they're trapped.
Yeah. And I just want to add to that list that you just read. That was a list that I pulled up online in 2019. And in 2019, there was a sports ban in Idaho, I believe, that had not gone into effect yet, but had passed. And that's all I know of. I'm pretty sure that was all there was. This wasn't something that was widespread across the country. And now there's a sports ban in well over half the country. And there's a ban on medical care for my daughter in over half the country. And in Montana specifically, there's a sports ban and a medical care ban. So when that list was written, it didn't even include the bans against her rights. It was just the rights she did not have. So...
So it's even gotten worse in some ways.
It's just being constantly traumatized. We recently moved to California to get out of it, and I cannot express what it is like to feel like we can live our lives again, to feel like we want to go out into the world and, go for a swim or go to a cafe or anything, to be alive, because we do not have to constantly fight for our daughter's basic rights and constantly be on guard about whether or not she's safe.
You had to start paying attention to you had a new liturgical calendar, and it was the legislative session. Every time it came around, it was like this ritual you had to go through again of all of the things you had to worry about. And you'd say you had an immense privilege of never having to really pay that much attention to it before. But now you do, and as we're facing possible federal implications with a Supreme Court that often sides on conservative issues with a 6-3 majority, as we're recording this, we're heading up to the presidential election that could have huge implications for trans rights. And so even in California, there are still things that parents are having to worry about. I wanted to say one quick word about sports and why they matter. Greta fell in love with downhill skiing and wanted to be a competitive racer and really loved that. And the sports bans have been really troubling to you, and I just wanted to read this part. You say it shocks you to think of these sports bans. Such a simple thing, an activity with a group where you have to try together and learn and fail and try again. And what it did for her confidence, her frustration tolerance, her general life skill of being able to show up and try was fast and extreme. You saw it as such a benefit for Greta as a person, and that makes you a strong advocate against these sports bans. We'll have future episodes that'll go more in depth on that question but I did want to put a word in that your book does a nice job of showing how it plays out in one particular kid's life and what skiing did for your daughter and in helping her learn more resilience and just what sports can do. Yeah.
Yeah. And she was a skier in New Hampshire, and that was one of the hardest parts for her, to leave New Hampshire.
Yeah.
And now she lives in a place where she can't ski, but our whole family knows that it's a lot better to not be able to do it because it doesn't exist here than to be banned from it. And with these sports bans, I mean, nobody knows that my daughter is transgender. There's no way to tell that she's transgender. It's so random to ban her from a group at school. I mean, you might as well ban her from playing the flute. Like, there's really, how can you send a child into school and feel like they will feel like a welcome and whole person, and then be like, oh, but you're not allowed to join this thing that everyone else can join?
That's Abby Maxwell. We're talking about her book, One Day I'll Grow Up and Be a Beautiful Woman, a Mother Story. She's also an author of novels like Lake People and The Den. Got her degree at the University of Montana and now is dedicated to advocacy for the rights of transgender youth, especially through this new memoir. Abby, what keeps you afloat right now? Like, how are you surviving? You've moved.
Yeah.
I mean, we've talked about some really difficult things in the interview, and I just would like you to spend a second talking to maybe parents of trans kids or people who don't know enough about it. Give us a sense of what's keeping you afloat.
You know, when we were still in New Hampshire and constantly fighting the legislative battles, I don't know what kept us afloat. I mean, we were getting darker and darker. There were things that we would do that, kept us somewhat okay, like going out into the natural world and, being with friends or that sort of thing. But I don't know, other than, I don't know. Like, I didn't know how to survive that anymore, which is why we left. Of course, we had immense privilege to be able to leave, but it also meant that we left our jobs. We left the home that we thought we would be in forever. It's the second time in 4 years that we've had to move to protect our child from these bans or just from the hate. And my whole family's in New Hampshire. We had to leave the home that we all loved. And I didn't think that we would be able to make it. I remember just standing there one day in my old home thinking, I need someone to come over and physically move my body through these steps because I do not think I can do it. But the thing that kept me going was that I had this vision in my mind that in New Hampshire, I was climbing up a mountain and I would forever be climbing it. I knew that the bills would not stop. Even if they didn't pass this year, they would come back the next year. Or if they did pass this year, they would come back. No matter what, they would keep coming back and coming back. It was going to be an uphill battle forever. And I knew that if I could get my daughter to this more diverse and accepting place where she had laws to protect her, it was like we were climbing this huge mountain, but there was another side. And just envisioning that like we would get to a summit and go down the other side. That is what kept me going. And now we're here. Thank God we have savings to live off of while we figure out a new life, build a new life. But I can feel my nervous system and I can see in my family just our nervous systems just relaxing and we're free to live our lives again.
I'm really glad that your answer doesn't let any of us off the hook. Your answer, you don't have any kind of special solution that people that are experiencing what your family's experiencing can turn to because it's an active and ongoing issue across this country. And what that says to me is every single one of us needs to step up, become informed, become advocates, and become more vocal than the people who are oppressing our trans friends, neighbors, children, and relatives. And so you're not letting us off the hook. What you're describing is really difficult, and we need to grapple with that. And that's a call for us to step up. So thank you for sharing that with us, Abby. I really appreciate it. Let's close with regrets, challenges, and surprises. Now, your book is fresh. So is there anything, there's a time between when you finish writing it and when it's going through the publication process. So is there anything that you wish you could change about it now that it's kind of ready to come out, or are you pretty satisfied with how it turned out?
No, thankfully I don't have regrets. And a lot of that is because of my brilliant editor who kept saying to me, this book is too important to not get every bit of it right. And so, I would send her my revisions and she would say, great job. And we're going back into it. And she really, really pushed me. And I'm so thankful.
What's her name?
Jenny Jackson.
All right, Jenny. Shout out Jenny.
Yeah, and I'm so thankful to her.
And then the other, we always do regrets, challenges, and surprises. Was there anything that was most difficult about putting this book together? Or was there anything that really surprised you as you were writing it?
Sure. I mean, this book was so challenging to write. Fiction, I have struggled with structure, but this book was emotionally so challenging to write. And I would wake up every day and slather my neck and my shoulders in marijuana, CBD, whatever cream to try to get rid of the tension headache. And I would sit down at my computer and I felt like I was attaching my veins to needles or whatever that went straight into my computer and just feeding my life force out. That is what I thought every single day.
Sounds a little bit different than writing Lake People.
Yeah. It was so emotionally draining. But I felt that I had to write it because I needed people to understand what was happening.
It sounds like it could give you a little bit of a break too. Your voice is out there now. You don't maybe have to go to every single meeting and do all these other things. You've got something to send. You've got something that can reach more people.
Yeah, I hope so. In writing it, it's such a personal book. And in order to write it, I sort of had to hold two things in my mind. I had to write it because I needed people to understand. But I was also telling myself when I was writing it that nobody had to ever read it. Or if I published it, I could do it under a fake name, that sort of thing. Because I was so afraid on a number of levels. And I think the surprise now is that I'm not afraid anymore. I mean, a huge part of that is because I'm not in New Hampshire anymore.
Yeah. Were you afraid of economic repercussions on your other books, or what were those concrete fears?
I'm afraid for all the hate that can come out because of the book, for people attacking us. The book names Guilford and it names Concord, where we moved to. And when we were still in Concord, I was afraid, physically afraid of, people could find us if they wanted to. And I didn't know what lengths people would go to. People have a lot of pride in their hometowns. And I really, I talk about what Guilford did to us. And afraid to just be out there in the public in that way. Afraid to have my daughter's story out there. But now I cannot wait for this book to be out in the world. Because I know all of that will come, but I think that I can block it out enough. And I think that it's not a big price to pay for having people read the story. It is a book that I really believe in. I believe that if people will take the time to read it, then they'll learn. And I truly believe that they'll start doing something or, speaking up.
Yeah, these first-person accounts, these personal stories are so important to help people understand. And so I'm grateful for you not only writing it, but being willing to come and talk to us about it. Thank you so much, Abby.
Yeah, thank you.
Again, the book's called One Day I'll Grow Up and Be a Beautiful Woman, A Mother's Story. Thanks for listening to another episode of Relationscapes, or if this is your first episode, welcome. I hope you'll check out some of our other episodes, and maybe you could also recommend the show to a friend if you're enjoying it. That's actually the number one way that people find out about podcasts, is through friends, family, and other people that they care about. You can find a full transcript of this episode and other episodes at relationscapes.org. There's a lot more to come on the show, so why not take a second to review the show? Go to Apple Podcasts and write your thoughts. Don't overthink it. Just go write some basic ideas about the show. What do you like about it? What's an episode that you enjoyed? Mates of State provided our theme song. Relationscapes is part of the Dialogue Podcast Network. I'm Blair Hodges, and I'll see you next time.